I first saw The Shining when I was 12 years old. My mom took me to see it in theaters when it first came out, and it was unlike any film that I had ever seen before. It really got under my skin in a way that I didn't quite understand at the time. But in retrospect, I think that I really related to young Danny in the story, because I was also an only child. My parents argued a lot, and I had a very vivid imagination. And so The Shining really spoke to me on a visceral level. And I think that's part of why it stayed with me for so long, and I slowly became obsessed with the movie. This project took 12 years. I never imagined at the beginning of the process that it would take so long. But it ended up being a blessing in disguise. Because it took so long to create the book, I had the opportunity to really take the time to track down every living person who worked on the film. I discovered that many of them had photographs as well as stories to tell that had never been told and images that had never been seen. So I'm kind of glad that it took so long, because if we had put this book together very quickly, a lot of the amazing images and stories that we tell in the book wouldn't have been a part of the book. So many years ago, I started collecting things from The Shining, anything I could get my hands on, whether it was photographs or fragments of the script, interviews with some of the people who had worked on the film. And it was just for myself, because I was so obsessed with the film. But at some point, I thought that it would be fun to gather all this material together and digitize it and put it online. So I created a website called theoverlookhotel.com. and shared basically everything that I had gathered with the world. But I actually had an ulterior motive at the time, which is that I hoped that people would approach me who maybe had things that I had never seen before. And that actually happened. I found a lot of the things that I got my hands on just because people liked the site and had their own memorabilia that they wanted to share. So theoverlookhotel.com ended up being a really important part of the beginnings of my research and gathering a lot of the materials that ended up in this book. In 2005, TASCHEN published a big coffee table book called the Stanley Kubrick Archives. And there was a lot of material from The Shining in it that I had never seen before. And it really sparked my imagination, and it got me thinking, what else was there? What else was there in the archives? So in 2010, I had an opportunity to visit the Stanley Kubrick Archive, and it was extremely exciting for me. I saw a lot of things that I'd never seen before. I learned things that I didn't know. And it was really during that visit to the archives that I first had the thought that maybe there should be a book about the making of The Shining. One of the most amazing things for me personally about having worked on this project, creating this book, was that I've gotten to know many members of Stanley Kubrick's family. And I've also had the opportunity to go out to Chittochbury, the estate that Kubrick lived at for the latter part of his life. And that was thrilling for me as a huge fan of Stanley Kubrick to know I was actually in his home. And I was very surprised to discover that the family's kitchen table that they eat around and have eaten around for years is actually the table from The Shining that Jack sits and types his manuscript at. So I've actually gotten to go to the house a few times, and every time my breath is kind of taken away as I've sat and eaten at that table, and knowing that this table is where scenes from my favorite film in the world took place just blew my mind.